Welcome, everyone. We can start now. This is the book launch of the Amsterdam Town Hall in Words and Images, Constructing Wonders. It's edited by Caroline, by Bram Van Oostveldt, and by myself. And we're very happy that Meredith will give a reflection on the book. But first, we'll give some insights of what we did together with the authors. Dat is Pieter Vlaardingerbroek, Frederik Knechtel, Minus Graven, and Laura Plezier. I first give the floor to Caroline to give the first part of the presentation. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stijn, and thank you, Meredith, for agreeing to speak at this book launch. I hope everybody can hear me. Stijn asked me to explain something of the thinking behind the book, which of course he should do himself, as he did most of the work, together with Laura and Minou and Frederik and the other members of the group of the research group funded by the European Research Council, who worked on the Sublime in Amsterdam and Paris in the 17th century, called Elevated Minds, which led to a number of articles and a few books, but also this collection of essays on the Amsterdam Town Hall, which is an attempt 50 years after Catherine Fremantle's famous book on the Town Hall appeared, to revisit it, to rethink it, and also to take stock of the vast amount of new source material that the Elevated Minds team discovered about the Town Hall, which is one of the most talked about buildings in the 17th and 18th century in Europe, I believe, which created even more of a stir than Banqueting House or even St. Paul's. These texts vary from plays to poems, sermons, letters, pamphlets, and even visual commentaries. So the resulting book is an attempt to look at the Town Hall from various new angles, looking at it as a eighth new wonder of the world, looking at it as it is represented in poetry, looking also again at some parts that have had less attention in the past, such as the caryatids, and also looking at its reception in the 18th and early 19th century. I think I should now, or I think I can now already hand over to Meredith, and after which I'll return to talk about, and other people will return to talk about their essay in the book. I think if that's okay with our chair today.
That's fine. Let's go to, then I prepare Meredith's PowerPoint. That's number 10, I guess. Yes, there you go, Meredith.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for inviting me to provide a response to this volume. As I said, it's been. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yep. It's been a real pleasure, and I just wish it were at term time so that I could have spent longer with it. But I'd also like to say just at the outset that this is a book that is really absolutely full of new and important insights about a building that is significant. You know, it's absolutely key, not only to understanding Amsterdam in this period, or even the Netherlands at this period, but European politics and architecture more broadly in the 17th century.
Meredith, can you speak a bit louder? I hear from some people that they cannot hear you very well.
Okay. Is it better if I hold this like this?
I hear you very clearly, but is this better, Harriet? No, better? Not better.
Should I take that? Let me try that. Is that better?
Just waiting for the chat.
It may have to do with the output levels of your computer.
What does that
mean? Very distant voice. Yeah, just continue then, because I hear you clearly. So.
I mean, I can hear you. So.
Stay with these then, Stijn, or.
Yeah, just continue.
Okay, we'll go back with these then. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little overview of the goal and the point of this volume, as they've stated in their introduction, and then just give you very brief glimpses of each of the chapters before then describing some of the themes that I've started to think of in a different way after engaging with this material. So the goal of this volume, as Caroline just said, is to sort of add to the current literature on the town hall, which has often been treated as a sort of masterpiece building work in a kind of monographic context, to move away from that idea of the town hall as a great architectural masterwork and to think of it in terms of the impact of the building. And I think that's been a very interesting approach to this question, a very fruitful approach to this question. And it's reflected in the dimensions of the book, that it clearly is not a kind of coffee table book with huge, beautiful images. It is a book of essays about material history, cultural history, etc. So the book starts from the following question: how is it that the town hall, which was unprecedented in scale and richness, how is it that this building could be constructed in Amsterdam in the 17th century? In other words, how could the burgomasters be sure that the public would accept it, given the concerns about displays of wealth and etc.? And there are two specific problems that the authors associate with this question. The first is that of the building's classical style and the potential that that style could be associated with papal Rome, with those kinds of tradition, and with Catholic architecture in countries more generally, especially in light of the recent history and war with Spain. And as we'll see in the essays, this issue is resolved or is solved by drawing attention to earlier histories, Greco-Roman pasts and Solomonic era architecture and narratives. And the second issue is the negotiation of the huge cost of the building. And here the concept of magnificence was used to justify the building. And I think also we can see with the poems and with the imagery that comes out of this sort of effort that the dialogue surrounding the building encompassed a whole lot more than the building itself. There was a lot of material, visual, and textual circulating at the time. Now, the volume sets out to discuss specifically these strategies of legitimization of the building. And the book's divided into two sections. The first, which comprises the first two essays, the introduction and first two essays, focuses on the building itself. So its design, its construction, the process of both, and the decoration, both in terms of the exterior and the interior. And the second part is entitled, quote, Constructions Before and Beyond the Construction. And this is about, in a sense, this is about the building in a conceptual realm. So this is about the ceremonies and the rituals that took place in and around the building, and the text and images that represented those rituals and ceremonies. And the themes that I have sort of thought about differently after looking at this material, I'll just list them now, and then I'll speak about them a little bit more at the end. And they are the following: the nature of time as it relates to this building, both material and conceptually. And I think this is a subject that one tends to, and a building that one tends to think about as static in time, and also sort of iconographically and perhaps even visually. And that my view on that has changed dramatically since reading these essays. Also, the degree to which movement, both temporally and geographically, defines this building and a lot of the materials surrounding it. And of course, the entire nature of the engagement with the past in the 17th century Netherlands. It's more nuanced than we may think with respect to this particular building. So I included just some slides to introduce you to the different essays and some of the images that are discussed in those. But the first essay by Peter Floridgebrooke provides new information on the building with respect to design and construction. And he discusses the circumstances of the idea of reconstructing, of building a new town hall, and that had to do with the visit of Marie de Medici to Amsterdam in 1638. And one of the kind of critical points that he makes is rethinking the intense focus on classical design sources that have always been highlighted when it comes to discussing this particular building. For example, Palladio and Scamozzi. These are the kinds of sources that were discussed certainly by Fremantle and many after her. He argues that we need to sort of broaden that focus, and he argues for an alternative model that was in play here with respect to the design of the town hall, and that is the Temple of Jerusalem and the Palace of Solomon, as viewed through architectural treatises such as that by Villalpando in Spain. And I'm just showing you here some images from his essay. On the top right, it's an image of the old town hall, and this was the town hall that was thought to be inappropriate when Marie de Medici visited, and was the impetus for building a new town hall. And then this kind of wonderful series of images that shows the way the design changed over time in terms of how the building would be situated within Dam Square, because of course that was a contentious issue. How much space is it taking up? What has to move so that it can be built in that space, etc. So this focus on Old Testament precursors is something that a number of the authors focus on, and that's one of the ways in which an association with a use of classical architecture and the potential association with Roman architecture and with Catholic tradition could be tempered. Oops, sorry. Oh, and this is lovely. This is an image of the of Solomon's temple and palace as it appeared in Villalpando's historical treatise. So you'll have to look through the book to spend a bit more time with that. I don't want to take too much time. Right. Now the second essay by Caroline van Eck reframes the Dutch Republic in a very interesting way. She describes the Dutch Republic as a successor state. And she's borrowing this term from political theory and political history. And it is a term that's used to describe states that result from the demise of empires. So one might think of the Roman Empire, etc. But of course, in this case, the Dutch Republic did emerge directly from the demise of the Habsburg Empire. So Van Eck argues that in framing Amsterdam as its successor state, we can start to think about the town hall a little bit differently. Because of course, politically, the Dutch Republic was an unprecedented entity at this time. And Caroline states in no uncertain terms that there was absolutely nothing like the town hall before it was built. There were a number of features, such as the lack of a central entranceway, the use of a three-story, a single space that took up 3 different stories. There was nothing like it before this time. And back to the idea of the Solomonic precedent, she argues that that was one way in which this young state could establish its own pedigree. You know, we're very used to talking about how the Dutch Republic framed itself after the revolt from Spain. What sort of myths, what sort of narratives did it associate with in order to establish its own legitimacy? But she also argues that Van Campen and Paulinus drew on 2 specific motifs, major and widely used features of Roman art in this building, in order to access the material culture of religion, to use the material culture of religion as a way of negotiating some of these ideas. The first is the triumphal arch, and on the left you can see the use of the triumphal arch at the end of the Citizens Hall there, leading into one of the other hallways. I think it's Lieben's painting there on the end. And of course, the triumphal arch embodies triumph in a very straightforward way, such as the triumph over Spain, and suggests links to ancient Rome. But she also discusses the festoon, which is a different kind of motif, and one that's often associated with decoration and perhaps meaningless decoration. But she, in fact, argues, looks at the festoon's history as in antiquity as a garland, and thinks about the notion of sacredness and the kinds of festivities that were associated with garlands and that were associated with this motif from before ancient Greece. So by focusing on these two features in the town hall, and she sort of uses them as biographical vignettes, she's hoping to sort of open up a space in which interpretation can be approached differently in the town hall. And she of course notes that these festoons appear all over the building, and they're treated with great care, and that they are the clearest manifestation of a process of style transfer at work in the town hall. So the use of these motifs, the inclusion of objects associated with Amsterdam's wealth in the context of a festoon, in order to appropriate that classical tradition and make it relevant to the local message. So the second part of the book, which is entitled Constructions Before and Beyond Construction, focuses less on the building itself and more on how artists and authors experimented with capturing in texts and images the effect of the town hall, and it was seen as a great wonder of its age. And what's a very unusual point is made here, and this is new material that's brought out in the book, is a corpus of around 100 poems that were written in praise of the town hall, many of which have never been translated before, or have never been discussed before, much less translated into English before. So that's a very interesting chapter of material that's been added to this discussion. So in this second section, Stijn Bussels' essay is on let me move to the next. Oh, I'm sorry, that was that relates to the chapter on the poems, and a lot of these poems were actually translated, as I said, into English for the first time and placed into real context. And when I was talking before about sort of movement and all of the material that surrounds the building itself, a lot of these poems would have been circulated in pamphlet form and would have been circulated over time. So it's a spreading out of the reception of the town hall over time and space. There we go. And Stein's essay, Portrait of a Building, also belongs to the second part of the volume. And here he argues that a new genre of painting really emerges from all the depictions of the town hall. And he calls them portraits of buildings, the portrait of a building. And he argues that painters of buildings, like painters of people, painters of portraits, were required to show individuality while also conveying a kind of transcendental greatness. And he uses this painting here, Bergheide's early Dam in Amsterdam of 1668, as an example. And he discusses painterly strategies that were used in order to animate buildings. So it's a sort of dialogue between painter and building, and that the painter is largely responsible for helping to animate the building. And here he talks about the positioning of the building with respect to the viewer, that it appears to slightly lean back, and that the recession and the projection and recession on the facade of the building there are enhanced in order to highlight the light and shadow on the front of the building, and in order to make the image of the town hall more dramatic. So paintings such as these, and there were many, I think Bergheide did as many as 36, paintings such as these helped to spread the fame and the reputation of the town hall, but also poems that were written not only on the town hall, but on paintings of the town hall helped to spread the reputation of the building. So this essay presents a very interesting intersection of building, text, and painted image, and how they together function in a kind of multimedia way to spread the knowledge about the building and fame the fame of the building over time and over space, across space. The fourth essay focuses on the tribunal of the town hall, and I think we'll be hearing from the authors of each of these essays shortly, so I won't say too much about these. But the author here speaks specifically about Paulinus's caryatids in the tribunal and the sculptor's use of a particular conception of the caryatid, and that is the Vitruvian caryatid, which relates to the origin story from which the caryatid comes, and that this particular kind of caricature focuses on or emphasizes the emotions of shame and penitence, and how appropriate those are in the context of this tribunal. Okay, and the fifth essay by Minu Schraven looks at the ceremonies that contributed to the construction of the town hall in the public imagination, some of the rituals associated with it, such as laying the foundation stone in 1648. And she illustrates here the silver trowel that was used in as part of that ceremony, and the little apron that was worn by the children of the burgomasters who were taking part in that ceremony. And I think this is a very good example of how ritual, and not one single ritual over time, she points out, how those rituals served to create a sense of the town hall, and how those objects were preserved after the rituals and served in a way, not really as Republican relics, but served as a way of extending that narrative beyond that particular moment. And finally, the final essay looks at the impact of the building in the 18th century. And this is a really, really interesting and important subject, because it brings up the point that reception of the town hall is something that something that changed over time. And this is something that, of course, one knows in a theoretical sense, but it's hard to remember when our focus on the town hall tends to be the moment of 1648, in which the first foundation stone was laid, as it's symbolically connected to the Peace of Munster, etc. We think of it as a particular building in space and in time. And this essay shows us very much that taste and the critique of the building changed over time. And that's, I think, very important to know and to bear in mind and to explore further. So just to conclude with some of my thoughts about the volume, and these are sort of early thoughts that I look forward to engaging further with these discussions, and to think about them in greater depth, both with respect to my teaching and my own work. But to me, there's a distinct way in which this volume is injecting movement into a subject that, as I said at the beginning, tends to feel somewhat static, perhaps because of the monumentality of the building itself, or, as I said, the focus we place on that one moment, 1648, or even 1655, the inauguration. But what comes out of these essays is the need to radically expand our conception of the building, both in terms of design, the various iterations of the design, the length it took to come up with a particular design and to build the building, and conceptually how the concept of the building changed radically over time. And again, on the theme of time, these essays show just how long the process of design, building, and indeed reception took. This is not something that can be easily quantified within even a 5-year period. This is something that must be considered over a much longer period of time. And also, I think the nature of the ritual that surrounded the different phases of the building, both with respect to, the actual laying of the foundation stone, but also the poems that were written, the paintings that were painted, the poems that were written about the paintings that were painted of the building. I think we need to think again about the performative nature of these rituals. I think Stein's done that very, very well. And also we need to think again about this focus on the use of history, and that the Palladian and the Scamozzi model needs to be broadened. Also, I think we've often seen the town hall as a sort of culminating moment for the Dutch Republic. This is something that Caroline talks about in her essay, politically, historically, and in terms of visual culture. And we need to shift this conception of the town hall as a kind of apex and replace it with the notion of a negotiation or a dialogue, and not one that takes place at a particular moment, one that takes place over time. A process that is altogether less categorical in nature and perhaps less clear, but that's infinitely more interesting. And I think it's a process that this volume captures absolutely beautifully. I hope I haven't taken too much time.
Thank you very, very much. No, you didn't take too much time at all. Thank you so much for this thorough analysis of our book. I'm really happy with having that overview, and it's a very good start to now give the floor to Caroline for her elaboration on that part of the architecture, how the architecture can be seen within that longing for an empire. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Like Meredith, I'm in the UK. I think we're really struggling at the moment with internet. So I hope that I won't freeze and be muted, as has happened many times already today, because we simply have too many conflicting internet networks at the same time in a small space. It seems the best internet quality these days in the UK is on the Isle of Skye. Well, thank you, Meredith, for your very perceptive and clear and broad analysis of what the book tries to achieve. I think in a way it's good to return for a moment to the architecture, because the architecture for a long time has been the focus of much of the studies on the town hall, far more than paintings or ornament or furniture or the sculpture. And I think if you look back at the tradition of the historiography on the town hall, which in a sense begins with Catherine Fremantle's book on the iconography of the town hall, after a number of smaller 19th century studies, which are much more about dating and reconstructing the building process and trying to establish what exactly was the role of Van Campen versus Qualinus. And of course, the difficult question, to what degree Van Campen trained as an architect and whether he actually visited Italy or not. What we try to do is really step away from all this, which doesn't mean that the results from this approach are not extremely valuable, but we felt it was time to take a different look at the town hall, which we started to do within the context of the Elevated Minds program on the Sublime, which is all about the impact of buildings and artworks on viewers, the intended impact, but also the actually achieved impact. And once you take that perspective, you start to realize many things that may have become a bit obscured in an approach that I characterized in my own essay as an etiological approach. So one that concentrates on trying to trace the original sources of the architectural design and much of the architectural ornament. So for instance, Fremantle and Otterheim have both showed very clearly how much Van Campen was indebted to Scamozzi, and especially the part of Scamozzi's treatise on the orders, that very often Van Campen, like many architects in the north at this period, really tried to apply the designs, for instance, for door frames to the town hall. Similarly, in Pieter Vlaardinbroek's very revealing and fascinating essay on the origins of the idea of the town hall in reconstructions of the Temple of Solomon, what happens in this kind of research is that the dynamics of it, so to speak, is backwards. It's about trying to understand the building, which is an extraordinary building. I'm still, after all these years, every time I go there, I'm still struck by the immense impact of the handling of space in it, because it integrates 3 floors into one space in the Burgers Hall. What happens in these existing studies is the movement is in, so to speak, backwards. It tries to put the town hall and its design into the tradition of the revival of classical architecture, which is an extremely valid approach and which has brought us very much. But once you start thinking about impact, one of the things that struck Stijn and Laura and Bram and myself very much is that some people, and especially Constantijn Huygens, talk a lot about relation to classical architecture. But most people who write about the town hall actually don't. Except for the very interesting case of the pastoral play by Everhard Meister, where Michelangelo and various other Renaissance artists are a figure to express their amazement and admiration for the town hall. But there as well, it's not so much about checking or looking at the town hall from the perspective of how it relates to these Renaissance or Roman models, but there as well, it's about impact and about the transformation and understanding the novelty of the building. So that, and also because it's always a challenge to write something new about the town hall. So what I did was looking at two relatively understudied aspects, namely the festoons and the motif of the triumphal arch. Because both, once you notice them, are everywhere in the town hall. The motif of the triumph is already in the sculpture of the facade, of course. There you see the triumph of Amsterdam as a maritime empire. The motif of the triumphal arch is also inside, for instance, over here in the overmantel relief in the burgomaster's room, showing the triumph of Fabius Maximus Cunctator, a mayor of Rome, incidentally, or not coincidentally. Triumphal arch figures, let's see what I can do this. Yes, in the monumental framing of passages at the opposite ends of the Citizens' Hall towards what's now the English Quarter and the royal apartments over here. And thinking about the triumphal arch as such an important generator of forms in the town hall made me think about the revival of the triumphal arch and the ritual of the triumph in early modern Europe. And once you start looking at that history, you realize that on the one hand, the triumphal arch and the associated ritual of the triumph was one of the first vehicles by which classical architecture and Roman political and religious ritual was revived. It's very intriguing to realize that the first revival of the triumphal arch is in Venice, of all places, one of the big models as a state for the Dutch Republic, in their land entrance of the arsenal, so the Entrata della Terra. But also, if you look at the whole reception of triumphal arches and triumphs, it's obvious that there we find expression of a kind of ambivalence about reviving imperial Roman architecture, which after all was pagan, not Christian, and associated with a tyrannical state model. The kind of ambivalence that you don't find in the treatises of classical architecture. And so looking at a triumphal arch suddenly allows you to tap into a kind of sources that tell a bit more about or give a context to the whole ambivalence that also surrounded the construction of the town hall in Amsterdam, which we shouldn't forget was a very disruptive intervention in the urban fabric, disrupting the medieval labyrinth of little streets, and which caused some unquiet among Protestant ministers. But the triumphal arch also points to another important element, I think, in understanding the novelty and the impact of the town hall, which is that the Dutch Republic is a typical successor state. Now, the notion of the successor state is one developed by scholars of the Byzantine Empire as well as the Burgundian Empire, and which is used to identify the behavior of states that come into being after their legitimate ancestor, so the Duchy of Burgundy in this case, or the Habsburg Empire, disintegrates. And these successor states, they all start to behave in a similar way, which is that they seek to establish part of their legitimacy by drawing on the formal and political language of their legitimate predecessor. Now, in the case of the Dutch Republic, this was tricky because the Habsburg Empire, for obvious reasons, was not a good choice. Neither was the Duchy of Burgundy. So instead, they go for two quite, how should I put it, constructed ancestors, namely the Jews of the Ancient Testament, and hence the whole interest in connecting the town hall to the Temple of Solomon, but also reviving the old myth of the Batavian tribes who first were allies of the Romans and then became their opponents. In the case of the town hall, this leads, for instance, to the presence of Rembrandt's famous painting of the Oath of Claudius Civilis. But it also, I think, helps to understand, to look at the town hall as a case of successor state behavior, to understand why this intense effort to recreate a Roman building, not just in the handling of the orders or the handling of ornament, but also in the creation of this immense interior space, which does recall the basilicas and the Pantheon, of course, in Rome. The second, even more understudied aspect of the, or feature of the town hall, what's happening here? Here we are, is that of the festoons. Now, Van Campen was very interested in festoons. He designed them, he published the designs, we can see them here. They are clearly based on festoon designed by Raphael, for instance, in the Farnesina. But when you look at the festoons in the facade of the town hall, you see that he completely adapts them to the Dutch situation. So he adds the sources of Amsterdam's riches, fish, grain, fruits, and so on. Now, festoons are very interesting features because they have an extremely long pedigree. They go back, they are among the oldest surviving artifacts from ancient Greece. In ancient Greece and Rome, they had a clear apotropaic function to ward off intruders in temples and to protect the bearers of the festoon. And these Greek and Roman connotations were quite present to the 17th century educated beholder, because they were revived, for instance, by Duchoul for Louis XIV, but also by Photius, the great classicist, in his treatise on idolatry, and also by the church father Eusebius, who writes a treatise on festoons and garlands, in which, even though he criticizes it, he conserves and keeps for us much lore and meanings of festoons and garlands. So by looking at these two features, the triumphal arch and the festoon, and having a snapshot of their longue durée biography, I hope to have shown that there is a way of looking in a different way at the town hall, which makes us more aware of the cultural meaning and the cultural memory, if we can use that phrase, that the town hall was supposed to embody. And another very interesting element in the background, I think, is Perugino's painting of Christ giving the keys to St. Peter's of 1481 in the Vatican, in the Sistine Chapel, where we have the integration of the triumphal arch and the festoon. And I don't know whether Van Campen ever saw this painting, but I do know that it's highly likely that he was very familiar with Mantegna's Triumphs of Caesar, the most famous and the most elaborate presentation of Roman material culture and the whole material culture of the Roman ritual of triumph, because there exists, for instance, this copy by Rubens and Erasmus Quirlinus of Mantegna, of the Mantegna cycle, which of course is in Hampton Court, which is now in Prague. So I think there is a lot of circumstantial evidence, not many smoking guns, unfortunately, but much circumstantial evidence that allows us to situate the town hall, like for instance the Banqueting House in London, and the activities of Inigo Jones as a designer of masks, which are also all aimed at suggesting that Britain has a Roman pedigree. All this allows us, I think, to think about the relation between the town hall and the past in a different phase, so to reverse, so to speak, the dynamic. No longer try to see the town hall as a kind of repetition or revival of classical architecture, but instead see how the town hall is a vehicle for the transfer through time of classical architecture as a way of creating this new visual identity for a very new kind of state. So I'll leave it at this, I think, and I think we should have questions now. Thank you.
No questions yet. We're going to wait to do the questions in the end because I still have to do my presentation. But thank you very much, Caroline, for this part. Actually, the book had two big parts. On the one hand, of course, we looked at the town hall as architecture, of course. But then we also looked at what Meredith already mentioned as the construction before and beyond the construction. So actually those texts and those images that represent or that deal with the town hall and that constructed in such a way that the whole aura or the meaning of the town hall is not only described or emphasized, but even enforced, given more strength and even given a very specific meaning. So we already saw and we already referred to those wonderful works of Catherine Fremantle and Pieter Vlaardingerbroek, but we can also refer to works as the essays by Kees van der Ploeg and Joop de Jong, and they have discussed the building as a kind of a continuation of the 15th and 16th century town halls, being a token of republicanism, in which the rich cities of the Low Countries could express themselves as city-states. What we've done in this book is, of course, we do agree with that view, but we also see some novelty, some real innovation, and that innovation is about how the burgomasters proclaimed their power, the power of the city and the power of themselves. And to do this, we could not only focus on the building, but also on the 100 poems we had, and also the hundreds of images of the building that were made even before the construction work started in 1548, and continued long after its inauguration in 1655. And by putting the attention on the visual and textual representations of the building, we have pointed out the fact that by a very different media, its overwhelming impact was not only made a topic of discussion, but was given extra power and meaning. And that's exactly what we try to make clear. And my contribution go even a step further by saying that by focusing on some texts and images that present the building as a living being. Yeah, thus, the town hall was far more than a mere showcase. Artists and writers presented it as a supernatural force that stood by the city and the municipality in acquiring eternal fame. And I did not mention this in the book, but this is a new idea I had all of a sudden by rereading Louis Marin's Le Portrait du Roi. All of a sudden, I could relate and I could explain that series, those loads of poems and images, also as kind of a composite portrait. And with the idea of composite portrait, Marin does not refer to one very specific painted portrait, but to medallions and very rich diversity of texts that compose a portrait, that compose an image of the king, the French king, Louis XIV. And I think that similarly, we could look at those poems and those images of the town hall, and if we bring them together, we also have that kind of composite portrait of the building, which serves on the one hand, of course, to give a portrait an image, a stronger image of the building, but also serves to give a portrait of Amsterdam and the municipality. And that's really clear, because the burgomasters shifted that often that just portraiting them as the rulers is far harder than making such a composite portrait for the French king, for example. To put it very concretely, we showed how poems, drawings, prints, and paintings construct a building as a living being in order to powerfully present the rich city and her government. And it starts with with this kind of drawings, a gouache by Jacob van Oostveldt. And I want to focus in it on that because it laid at the basis of many, many drawings, prints, and paintings. In the gouache, we see the building in a finished state, which was certainly not the case in that very year in which the gouache was made. And next to the town hall, we see the new church and the high tower, which was not built yet, and it would never get built. So, so what is so interesting for me is that often this drawing is used to emphasize the fierce battle within the government of the city between the advocates of the grand town hall, in contrast with what they call the religious faction in the city government, headed by Burgomaster Willem Bakker, in favor of the big tower on the new church. At the surface, you could say there was simply not enough money, so they had to choose between one of the two building projects. But the real conflict was about whether Calvinism or the commercial spirit was the most important characteristic for the city. So that's often this drawing, this gouache, is often seen as an illustration for that battle within the government of Amsterdam. But I think that we should interpret it differently. Van der Oostveldt made this drawing a year after Bakker's death, and with Bakker's death, the whole idea of the big tower, the large tower, the high tower was already put, let's say, a bit on the backside. So maybe you could say that this was an attempt to promote the restart of the ideas of the construction, but also to avoid, and that's interesting, I think, putting the tower in competition with the town hall. The grand town hall and the highest church tower in the Republic enforce each other in supporting a harmonious society, an ideal future. Van der Oostveldt presents the planned tower shoulder to shoulder with the town hall, both in full completion, to show how religion and civic rule go hand in hand. And the style of the two drawn buildings is different, as would have been the style of the actual buildings, reflecting the difference in function, one religious, the other administration. However, Van der Oostveldt uses the same colors for both buildings and brings the two together as a good match. Since other draftsmen, as well as printmakers and painters, copied and adapted this gouache time and again for more than a century, it has profoundly marked that composite portrait of the building. So that construction had the whole, bringing all those images and text together. In most of the images, the tower has disappeared as the plans were increasingly covered with dust. But Van der Oostveldt is influential in connecting the town hall with its direct environment, Dam Square. The square was named after the legendary dam in the river Amstel, where fishermen once settled the start of the city. On this respectable place, Van der Oostveldt and his followers stage Amsterdam burgers, as well as people from foreign countries involved in trade. Merchandise is supplied by boat. It's sold on the market stands and waited on the in the weighhouse, and then carried to all directions. Further, the square is populated by regents in their traditional black cloaks and black hats. Among the most famous examples of this influence by Van der Oostveldt, we can put forward Gerrit Bergheide. Meredith already mentioned that we still have 36 paintings left depicting the town hall, and this is one of the earliest, which already Meredith showed from now in Antwerp from 1668. Like Van der Oostveldt, the painter shows the liveliness of groups of people immersed in conversation and trade. And just as the gouache, the viewpoint is chosen in such a way that the weighhouse blocks most of the new church. But due to the fact that the tower has disappeared, Bergheide gives full prominence to the new town hall. However, often this painting is emphasized as showing the monumentality of the building. But what I did was, and Meredith referred to it, see it as showing some characteristics as human sitters can have for the painter, for the portrait. Thanks to the perspective used, the town hall appears to recline a little. Thus, the central bay in the carillon suggests a human head and is proudly held high. It's also remarkable that the vanishing point of the perspective is not in the middle, but has moved slightly to the left. Due to this shift away from the center, the building seems to turn a little in order to look in a certain direction. The idea of the town hall being portrayed as a person is not my invention. It is suggested in a poem on the town hall of Amsterdam, painted by the illustrious painter Gerrit Bergheide. And that poem is written by Peter Rixtel, a fellow townsman of the painter, and published only a year after the painting in 1669. Only few modern art and literary historians have dealt with the poem, and if they've done so, they labeled it very often as a long verse full of cliches. However, in our opinion, Rixtel's poem is totally the opposite. It is a clever play in which architecture, portraiture, and poetry are closely connected. At the very start of the poem, Rixtel observes that in Bergheide's painting, the building is painted from the shoulder and writes that it is done precisely in the same way as persons might lift up their heads. So he's really emphasizing it as a portrait. And after a few verses of introduction, he brings the town hall to life, because the town hall is taking the floor and is addressing it straight to the reader. And she is praising the portrait, her own portrait. And it's this kind of poem that gives us a very precious view on the multi-layered ideas regarding the impact of the paintings of the new town hall. Moreover, it shows how a text and an image together contribute to the composite portrait of the building in a comparable way as the composite portrait of the king, which is described by Louis Marin. In the case of the French king, as well as of the town hall, the sitter is idealized. Reality is not negated, but transcended to create an extraordinary living being, strengthening political rule. And whereas here in this painting by Bergheide, we are very lucky to have a poem that is directly written and is more or less giving us an insight in how the painting was viewed, at least by Rixtel. We have that many other paintings which unfortunately have no that kind of textual information. But by closely looking at it, we do have a similar view that artists were really creative, were in full experiment in how to render that building and how to give it extra meaning, extra impact, how to emphasize or even appropriate its impact, as here in those two paintings. And I'm not going to deal any longer with those two paintings because I really described that in the book. And let's see this as a teaser for the book. So go to the book and read it. I just want to finish this introduction by thanking once again the authors, Pieter Vlaardingerbroek, Freddy Knechtel, Minus Graven, Laura Plezier, and thanking my two other editors, Bram Van Oostveldt and Caroline van Eck, and of course thanking Meredith for giving this wonderful view on the book. So right, the floor is open for questions. I just already have a question from Harrietta, but please put your questions in the chat and we will try to answer it. Harrietta has a question. I just read it aloud for everyone. If the town hall was so important in the city's burghers to the point of being portrayed as a person in a poem, how does the team explain the fact that in the post-Napoleonic era, the city was unable to reclaim the royal palace as the town hall? This is, of course, a totally different period. Quickly saying that we did choose to stop at indeed the moment when the town hall becomes a palace, with the Napoleonic presence. But you're right, it is indeed, after that period, it never became a town hall any longer. I don't know, Caroline, if you can can formulate an answer on this. It's a good question. It's not directly in the book, but maybe you can help us.
I'm not at all an expert on the 19th century history of the building, but I'm not even sure they had a choice.
Mm-hmm.
No? Whether there was
No.
a serious option that the royal family would be willing to let go of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
But Faye Schmid might
Absolutely.
be better qualified to answer this.
Mm-hmm. I'm just quickly looking at this here. I haven't seen him under the names. I think he could not make it tonight. So I think we have to put that question to Frick, because he's indeed one of the specialists there. But indeed, the political situation, which so drastically changed at the Napoleonic presence, can indeed be one of the most important reasons, I guess. Another question by Stephanie Dickey. It appears this book does not give much attention to the painted decorations within the building. Is that correct? And if so, did the editors decide deliberately not to discuss the paintings? Well, we did have indeed that choice made for very practical reasons. We know that some art historians are now at this very moment working on it. And Marissa Baas, for example, is working on it at this very moment. But also Erik-Jan Sluiter is working on the paintings. There's already a preview on his views in that catalog on the representation of myth in the paintings of the town hall, but he is also preparing a book on the topic. And we already had Marissa Baas saying some of her ideas here at our talks, the museum talks that we organize at Leiden, where she focuses on the Rembrandt Claudius Sigilis painting, which Caroline also mentioned. So indeed, it is a deliberate choice. We do not focus so much on the paintings, because this is still a work in progress for other art historians. It's also strange. The holiday poems, for example, are not that often there. So they're not so much mentioned. And that was also one of the leading ideas for this new book, together with a new architectural interpretation. All right, I'm just waiting for if there are still some other ideas, still other questions to raise. Otherwise, we're just in time to finish. All right, thank you very much for being here, all of you, to listen to this. Oh, there's still
yes,
composition of the labored force.
Yeah.
I give the floor to you, Caroline.
Yes, Laura Plezier and I talked a lot about that, because we at some stage considered whether there was even a role of enslaved labor, but we were never really, or Laura, I should say, I didn't venture into the archive, but Laura was never able to find anything about the composition of the labor force. I mean, I don't know whether Laura is in the room. I think I saw her. Laura?
Let me see. Now then I have to put her live. Let me see if I can find her. Now I have to run through the whole list, so that this takes some time.
Yeah.
So please wait a little bit. Yes, there she is. I hope you're available, Laura. I cannot put you on live, strangely enough. Normally I could, but I'll make you moderator so you can put yourself live. Or power, or no, there's something technically she cannot be put on live, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So she cannot come here with her camera and her mic.
Yes.
Oh, she puts it in the chat. There is indeed no evidence
No.
for slavery whatsoever. Thank you so, Laura. Thank you so much, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Oh, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you so much, Caroline. Oh, there's still the questions drop in. Could you mention? Could you mention the marble sources, quantities, and possible surplus of the material? Well, indeed, it is indeed. The marble sources is Carrara, the white ones, but there are also Bentheimer, the natural stone is Bentheimer stone most of the time, and they emphasize it time and time again. the laudatory poem. So in that way, the poets are really aware of the materiality, so the cultural meaning of the material being there, and they are emphasizing time and time again how hard it was to take all those materials there. Also the poles that have to make the fundament for the building, so being in the ground, in the swampy grounds, are emphasized time and time again. So in order to say how much work it was to make all those foreign materials present and to use them. So indeed, it is very, very important for the 17th century to emphasize that time and time and time again. Everyone does it. It's so important. It was such a hard labor, and so there are those very poetical descriptions that they say Scandinavia offered all its roots to Amsterdam in order to help building. That kind of rhetorical emphasis is certainly done there. So indeed, thank you for that question.
And there's a question.
Yes, indeed. So it's. Could you elaborate on the violence of the imagery in the Vos poems? It's right. So Vos emphasizes the whole violence of digging up the graves that were at the new church. So the graves near the new church, and that is emphasized as really disturbing the ghosts. But then again, it is repeated that by building the building, it also emphasizes bringing peace, because the ghosts all of a sudden, and also the god of hell, all of a sudden realizes why the graves are digged up and why they go so deep into the grounds. And then they are at ease and they understand, and they do submit, or they do subject, to the force, so to the rule, to Amsterdam rule, which is indeed first bringing up the violence and then putting down the violence by following the Amsterdam burgomasters. That's for me the meaning of the emphasis at the start of the poem in Vos for the violence. Now I don't dare to say goodbye to everyone because I said already 3 times. But I'm really quickly going to do, and then we just stop. No. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, thank you all of you for being here. I really enjoyed this book presentation myself. It was a little party for me as well. I hope it was also for you. Thank you all, and see you very soon on other occasions. Bye bye.
Bye.